This What's Working with Cam Marston podcast is brought to you courtesy of Michelob Ultra Beer.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is the radio show / podcast designed to bring you insight into the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace trends going on around us. My goal is to find guests who can talk to me about the trends that are influencing their business, who can talk to me about the things that they're seeing in such a way that you and I can benefit from what they do and what they know. My hope, again, with every show, and I've said this a lot, is that you and I hear something in this broadcast that will make each of us a little bit better at whatever it is that we do. Again, welcome. Glad you're on for the ride. If you follow current events, you'll recognize the terminology or the acronym ESG. It stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. And not too long ago here in the state of Alabama, and I think across the nation as well, there were arguments in Congress and the state houses, et cetera, over the role ESG should play in retirement plans. And I don't remember the detail in the weeds of this, but I think we can reasonably assume that one side of our political spectrum said ESG should be included, and the other side of the political spectrum declared that ESG should not be included. And they called each other names, and they stomped their feet, and they held their breath, and all this kind of stuff that our glorious politicians do these days. And ultimately, it was knocked out, if I recall correctly. Well, what is it? For people like me, I watched them rail on and read the headlines with my nose pinched. What is it? And that's what we're going to get into today. What I think we're going to learn here is that this new, I'm using air quotes here, this new approach and emphasis on measuring a company's environmental, social, and governmental impact, or governance, the way it governs itself. Many of us, and I'm raising my hand here, may think it's fairly new, but it's been going on for quite a while. Perhaps behind the scenes, perhaps out of the public view, but this conversation that many of us heard, which may be the first time it was introduced in such a way that it was loud and in our face, which was what the political debate was about, has actually been going on for a while. And that's what we're going to focus on today. What is it? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to you? Is there a way to utilize this in some way to benefit your company? Is this a flash in the pan? Have the environmentalists taken hold or taken control of this or whatever it is? I don't know. But anyway, that's the goal of the show, is to figure out what ESG is, why it exists, and how we can benefit from it. My guest will be Kai Gray when we come back from break. He's in the studio, will be in the studio with me. His company, based in Fairhope, is an ESG consultancy. They work with their clients to help them in some way or another around this ESG, either by increasing their clients' ESG scores, working with these companies to promote their ESG scores if they're doing very well. And I think there's a lot to be learned by what exactly this is and how it works. I do know this. There is undoubtedly a movement in our society, and I don't see this as not just a result of my boning up on ESG for this show, for more accountability from the organizations. There have been conversations, and you've likely heard them if you follow the business community, of is the purpose of a business to make money for the shareholders? And that has been the case for the longest time, as that's the purpose of business, is to make money for the shareholders. However, there seems to be a slight pendulum move of the purpose of a business is to certainly make money for the shareholders, but also take care of employees, also treat the environment correctly. So this myopic view of shareholder benefit at all costs, I think, is on its way out. It's going to peter out for a while. And if you follow the trends of our nation, the trends of the nation, whether they be HR trends, business trends, et cetera, they begin on the edges. They begin in the Californias, the Oregons, the Washingtons. They begin northeast, and they slowly move their way to the middle. And what I think is we're moving their way to the middle, as reflected by this conversation that we're having here in the state of Alabama today. Anyway, when we come back from break, Kai Gray, Hilly and I will be talking about ESG. You're listening to What's Working. Be right back. Sitting with Cajun Mike, owner E3 Termite and Pest Control. Cajun Mike, there are people I know that think their house is fully protected because there's some bait stations around the house. What's your thoughts?
My thought personally is bait stations do work. However, I do not believe in them as a standalone product.
What else do they need?
We do 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 treatments on a house. We will do a true liquid perimeter treatment. We do hollow void treatments, and we use bore care on wood when we can access it.
It's a thorough treatment, top to bottom, it sounds like, much more so than the bait station.
That is correct.
How do they find you, Cajun Mike?
They can find me at 251-850-PEST or e3pest.com.
e3pest.com. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston in the studio. Sitting across from me is Kai Gray. Kai's company is called Motive. They are an ESG consultancy. And we're going to get into what that is and why that matters to you and me in a brief moment. First, Kai, thank you for your time and welcome to What's Working.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited to get into the weeds on this topic because I know that ESG is misconstrued by most of the population. So let's begin at the top so that we can begin to try to educate here. Sure. What is ESG? And secondly, why does it matter?
Great. So I think the first thing to start with is just the acronym ESG. So it stands for environmental, social, governance. 3 things, 3 separate pillars that are metrics that are really around the performance of a company along those axes. So these are metrics that look at the environmental position of a company, sort of the actual production, what are called scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, to their fuel sources, to any number of environmental metrics. Same is true for social, same is true for governance. So in total, there's nearly 200 different metrics that comprise ESG as a full program. And
200 ways of measuring a company can measure their own impact.
That's right.
Under these 3 banners, environmental, social, and governance.
That's correct.
ESG is not only for manufacturers, though.
No. So ESG is applied to all businesses.
All businesses, right.
We always say sort of ESG exists whether you acknowledge it or not. It's sort of like the weather, right? Like these companies have a position on these things, whether they've articulated it or not. And they have the impacts that they have, whether they acknowledge those or not. And so, we're moving into an era where these things are becoming important for businesses to address. And so whether you're a technology company, whether you're a manufacturing company, whether you're a consultancy, it doesn't really matter. What matters with ESG, and this is a really important part of ESG, is that it's about what's material to your company in your industry. So this is where I would say it differs from traditional financial metrics in that traditional financial metrics can be applied to all companies sort of equally, right? The perspective is the same.
A P&L.
Yes, that's right.
All companies are going to have one.
Right. ESG is different. That in that some things are material to certain companies that are not material to other companies, right? There's some companies that you can ignore certain parts of it because it's just not applicable, right? So technologies don't burn a lot of coal, right? It's not something that's important to measure because it's not something that is an exposure for that company in that industry. And I think people sort of miss this, that the takeaway for people listening is, and I think this is an important thing, is that ESG is not the arbiter of truth. It's not telling you this company is good or bad. It's a measurement of something.
It's a scale.
It's a scale. And so really sort of taking a step back to where ESG came from, ESG is considered a non-financial metric or an extra financial metric. Mm-hmm. And it was developed really around for financial services to develop products. And so it started off sort of, way back when. And
so let me pause. Did financial services began this?
Well, so it was born out of, you had apartheid South Africa, right? And it was the first time that there was a concerted effort to start to list the companies that were participating in apartheid South Africa.
I remember those days.
Right. And after that, and so that created the first sort of impact investing. Right, you had a lot of endowments and universities and whatnot saying, no, we're going to divest of that. And
right.
There was songs about it and the whole bit, right? And then you had sort of this next phase of what was called sin stocks, right? These were sort of alcohol, gaming, tobacco, firearms, and different funds were created that around those themes. Those funds became very popular. Right. And so you had this confluence of things going on where you had sort of a sustainability movement. You had corporate social responsibility as becoming sort of a thing. Right. You had impact investing, all very different things. Mm-hmm. But they, as my co-founder and brother always talks about, we have this great conflation of everything into what is now just called ESG. Yeah. Right. But at one point were a bunch of different things, but it really came down to developing financial products, and now it's ETFs, that are trying to capture certain perspectives of companies. I want to invest in companies that do a very good job on their greenhouse gas emissions. So
I understand that. Yep. And I think it's wonderful that people can choose to channel their dollars into something that they support, right, morally, ethically, whatever it may be. So let's take a hypothetical. Mm-hmm. You and I sitting in a studio here, and in my hand is a plastic cup. And over there with you yep. is a red Solo cup. That Solo cup company has an ESG score.
Yes.
Whether they know it or not, whether they publish it or not,
that's right,
they have an ESG score. You and I are talking into microphones manufactured by a company called Shure.
Yep.
Shure has an ESG score. And if I am interested as an investor in, quote unquote, doing the right thing, and that could mean so many different things,
yep,
I'm going to go to Shure and say, hey, what is your ESG score? Now, Shure would be smart to know the answer to that.
That's correct.
How do they measure themselves, and is there a measurement tool that everybody shares, mm-hmm, such that Shure's score of 50 is equivalent to Panasonic's score of 50?
So the short answer is no to that. So the way that ESG is calculated, the scores are calculated, are by ESG rating agencies. And I equate them to consumer credit agencies, sort of Experian, TransUnion, Equifax.
Okay, so it's a third party.
It's a third party. There's 8 large ones, and their customers for the longest time were just the financial services yep. companies. And so you had MSCI and Refinitiv and S&P Global and Bloomberg has their own sort of rating services, all very similar to Moody's, right? So they issue a score, but that score is very proprietary. How they measure a company. So what you'll see, this company gets a B minus, or in a different rating agency will give it a 74, or get a 56.2. And low risk or high risk, and there's no standardization around ESG, and it's actually one of the big qualms. Companies are really asking for this, right? And that's why I think it's going to become a legislative issue, because companies themselves are the ones saying, "Hey, we need some rules to this. We're happy to participate. Tell us what we're shooting for here,
and something to compare to,
and so ESG is determined by an industry ranking, right? So Austal, for instance, will be ranked with their peers,
right,
and from an investor relations perspective, companies are trying to get into the top quartile of their peer group, right? Mm-hmm. So they get picked up by ETFs and different funds, and there's a lot of specialized funds out there. And so it's a very important thing for investor relations for public companies to keep track of.
I understand public companies.
Yes.
But imagine that I'm a local company.
A private company right here in Alabama.
And I've got 50 employees and I do $10 million in revenue. Yep. Am I thinking, thank goodness this doesn't apply to me, or am I thinking this should apply to me?
So, our perspective is that ESG is a business driver for companies. Right. This is how we go into engagements with companies. This is how we talk about ESG, because right now, so at the highest level, customers drive everything. Right. I heard it on your when you were talking to Atukampu that you talked to his 29-year-old daughter, and she's preferring to work for companies that have a work from home policy, right? That same sentiment is being applied to everything, right? And I've spent a lot of time doing user research with Gen Z and young millennials, and their buying habits are very different, and they're looking for sustainable steel, right? Whether they know it or not, they're actually researching these products. And
so you think in the future, these companies are going to somehow promote their ESG score if they have a strong one.
That's right.
And they're going to hope the consumer dollar follows that.
And more importantly, for private companies, if you're in the supply chain of a big company, let's say you're a supplier to Coca-Cola over in Atlanta.
Oh, I want to get into this. I think I know where you're going. And we're going to go to break, which is why I've interrupted you. Coke is going to say, for us to use your materials,
you got it.
You need to see an ESG score. It will be interesting to see if the federal government gets into that.
They 100% will.
All right. I'm with Kai Gray. His company is Motive. He is an ESG consultancy. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. When we get back, I want to talk about perhaps a contrary idea to this consumer dollar thing, and we'll use that as a cliffhanger. We'll be right back.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Hey, this is Cam Marston. My What's Working radio show has given me a front row seat to what's going on in today's workplace and workforce. I'm taking what I've learned and delivering it as a live presentation. If your company, team, or association is looking for a speaker to kick off or wrap up your event, check out my presentations at my website, cammarston.com, or find me on YouTube to watch some sample videos. You can expect actionable and relevant content delivered with lots of humor. On my site, you can find my client list and testimonials. I welcome your calls and your emails. Reach out. Let's find a way to deliver fresh, thought-provoking, actionable content to your event. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. I'm glad you're on for the ride. This is an interesting conversation. Sitting across from me in the studio is Kai Gray. His company is Motive. He's a partner in the company. It's an ESG consultancy, working with organizations to help understand the value of ESG and to enhance their own ESG score.
That's right.
Now, Kai, before the break, it was your hypothesis, and perhaps this is happening somewhere. I'm interested in that, but that one of the days the consumer dollar is going to follow these companies with the higher ESG scores. Now, I imagine in order to hit these high numbers, their profit margins are going to be lower because they're investing in different types of renewable energies and things of this nature, which have historically been more interesting. So in other words, the consumer dollar should follow, even though they're paying a little bit more.
That's right.
Do you remember the Made in America phase?
Absolutely.
Where everybody touted that they were made in America. And then they started getting made in China and the prices began to drop. And everybody said, you know, it's nice that it's made in America, but I'm saving money on this dishwasher because it's made in China.
Yep.
So the argument is this ESG stuff should be a motivator for people to pay more for that product or service. But ultimately, are they going to follow their wallet?
Well, I think so. What we're seeing in the broader market is that there's a pretty strong willingness to pay. Upwards of 35% more. But I would agree with the sort of overall assessment that you know, sort of there's a regression to the mean, right, when it comes to your willingness to pay. And I think, you know, as people get older, that sensitivity changes, particularly when it's your money that you've earned and that. I think that what's happening with ESG and sustainability at large, these are two different things, but they're very tightly coupled, is that companies are seeing positive economic growth from them that has to do with their market. It has to do with productivity. It has to do with their workforce. And they just become overall business drivers for them. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's going to continue. You know, and at the same time, their market becomes accustomed to it.
Before the break, I interrupted you. You were talking about a hypothetical Coca-Cola.
Yes. Yep.
Go into that. I think I know where you're going, but go into that.
So if you're a supplier to Coca-Cola, you're going to be asked for your impact report, your ESG report. If you're a private company, if you're a public company, that is public information, and Coca-Cola can get that on their own. But if you're a $10 million supplier to Coca-Cola, you're going to be asked for some form of sustainability, impact, ESG data. And where that gets used is that rolls up into Coca-Cola. So when you see a product that says made from 100% recyclable material or so-and-so, what they're really saying is our entire supply chain is bringing that forward. Mm-hmm. And so that's becoming a key thing. We work with, you know, we originally designed Motive to help public companies, but the reality is most of our clients are private companies that are in this exact situation where they call us and they say, hey, you know, we just got this RFP from one of our major customers and there's a whole section on ESG or sustainability. Can you help us out with that? And that's just becoming a very sort of common thing now in the sales process, right? In the RFP process for these large, let's say, you know, Fortune 1000 companies. Great.
Is it the consumer, let's say the Coca-Cola shareholder who is saying to Coke, we want you doing business with companies that have a ESG score of blank or you need to vet that score?
It's a combination of things, and it depends on the company. I mean, you certainly have what I'll call activist shareholders. Yeah. Exxon has the most notable in you know, that has Engine 1 bought enough to get a couple of board seats, right, and really sort of advocate for things from a board level. You know, what we're seeing from a lot of companies is it's their employee base. Right, their employee. We were talking to a large scrap metal firm, and it was a really striking conversation because this is a company that you would consider, you know, sort of older school. I wouldn't expect them necessarily to be at sort of the cutting edge of a sort of business transformation. And so my first question was why the real sort of pivot to this, and you know, throughout the company, and they said, well, we looked at our employee base. And it was an average age of under 35, and they saw this as twofold. One, as sort of a threat, right? That they weren't going to be able to attract talent if they didn't address these things. And two, it allowed them to differentiate an otherwise sort of commoditized product, right? That they would now have something that their competitors didn't have in sort of like this solid ESG program. But
so it became a recruiting and retention tool, their
Absolutely.
ESG approach, as well as a marketing approach.
That's right. And so I think what makes ESG fascinating and complex is that you have a myriad of stakeholders to it that have a very different perspective. So if you talk to investor relations, they're going to have a different view on ESG, as will someone in marketing, as will someone in HR.
Yeah.
And they all have a very valid opinion, but it's the thing that you know, the struggle that companies have right now is that they have a bunch of different components within a company that all have an ESG need somehow. Those are different, but ultimately, you know, there's an attempt to roll them up into one. And that can be a dicey thing, right? Not all companies pull that off particularly well, but you're seeing the motivation and really the pressure from both the customers and the employees, who are usually sort of the same groups.
Yeah.
You know, so it shouldn't be that surprising. It's just a sentiment change. And then you're having the shareholders, which again are sort of from a retail perspective are the same customers.
Yeah.
This is why I go back to, you know, it's all about the customers because it's all the same person, right? And it's all generational.
So I want to get into that, but the federal government, you said, was
Yes.
on its way to mandating this.
Yes.
So we've got Alstom here in Mobile,
That's
we've
right.
got in Huntsville, so many federal contractors there that the government is saying, let's take Huntsville and their missile systems businesses. If you're going to buy, if the federal government is going to buy the technology that you're selling us to manufacture this missile system, we need to see your ESG score, or it must be something like this.
That's right.
They're such a huge contractor, you know, a driver of the economy. It would seem that once that begins happening a lot, and maybe you know it already is happening a lot, but once that begins happening a lot, it's just going to push through to everywhere.
Well, I think that is true, and that's happening. And in fact, in front of me, I have sort of a brief that we send out to our clients on the federal acquisition regulations, and this was something that went out for DoD, GSA, and NASA. They basically said they categorized everyone as major or significant suppliers based on their yearly contract award. And in both cases, you know, I think the breakpoints were $7 million and $50 million. Mm-hmm. At $7 million, you had to publish climate disclosure, relatively straightforward. At $50 million, you had to do a much more comprehensive report. And, you know, that's absolutely going to impact Alabama companies. Right, because, you know, Huntsville, I think, did $3 billion in annual awards last year with the federal government.
Yeah.
A vast majority of those firms are going to have to start disclosing climate data in the not too distant future.
Lots of ESG conversation focused on the E, the environmental component. You and I have highlighted that in our brief chat together. But S is social and G is governmental. What's going on in the weeds of those two things?
You'll find a very strong argument from ESG people that G is the most important thing.
Yeah.
G is the one that I think we all recognize as a truer business metric, or a more traditional one, which is really gets into the ethics of a company, how it operates, how many board meetings does it have, how many, you know.
This is all a part of the G component of any sort of ESG report.
That's right. And so, you know, how many board members? Do you have independent board members? Do you have audit committees? Do you have governance of your company?
Right.
Do you understand these things? And so I think any investor should look at G, no matter what. No matter what you care about, you know, whether when it comes to E and S, the G is, hey, you're not going to invest in a company with a really low G score without investigating. S, I think that's the one that throws people the most because depending on your stance, and ESG is obviously becoming, you know, somewhat of a controversial thing at a political level, I think it's the S that throws people, that the idea of social. And when you really dig into what's being measured, it has much more to do with workforce.
Let's talk about that when we come back. I want to hear what those measurements are. You also mentioned that it's generational. And a guy like me, I got to follow up on what that means, what that looks like, and the implications of it going forward. I can imagine my children would want to make decisions much more on things that I would look differently at. So let's pick that up. I'm sitting in the studio today. This is Kai Gray in front of me. His company is Motive. They're an ESG consultancy. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. We'll be back after this break to talk a little bit more on what this looks like. And then, Kai, I want to hear, all right, so a company calls you. What do you do? What do you do to help them, and mainly why they've called? We'll be right back. This is Cam Marston with Cajun Mike of E3 Termite and Pest Control. Cajun Mike, what do builders need to know about your service?
Well, it's not just builders, but anyone building homes. What we are doing is we're adding the service that allows us to go in and treat all of the wood in a home before they cover it up with insulation and sheetrock. What this does is it will actually absorb into the cellulose of the wood and replace it with boric acid. That will prevent it from wood-destroying insect, mold, fungus, and wood rot.
Let me repeat that because that's interesting. Wood-destroying insects, fungus, mold, and wood rot with one treatment?
That is correct.
How long does that last?
Well, matter of fact, once we treat this, a manufacturer will guarantee it for up to 30 years.
Is this something a home builder, the actual person who's going to live in the home, needs to know about, or just the builder, or both?
Definitely the person building the house, because they want their house treated properly.
This is almost too good to be true, Cajun Mike. How can people find you?
You can find me at 251-850-7378, which is PEST, or e3pest.com.
e3pest.com. We're back in the studio. Kai Gray sitting across from me. His company is Motive. It's an ESG consultancy. He's a partner in the company. We're talking a little bit about how this stuff works, why you and I should care about it. Kai, my understanding is even though the political hoo-ha that was around this thing not long ago, this is already happening. This is well underway. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I think the CEO of Coca-Cola had a very interesting thing he said in an interview. He said, if the term ESG becomes too toxic, we're just going to call it something else, right? But the core tenets of ESG
are here to stay.
They're here to stay. Right?
So you said the S is the most likely misunderstood one. Let's pick that back up again.
Sure. I think
and S stands for social.
It stands for social, and it's really a measure of workforce health. Both figuratively and literally. So many of the questions deal with training, advancement ability, health and safety. We sort of, gets into the whole EHS, environmental health and safety aspects. A very small, I think it's 6% of the questions that we track that are tracked broadly have to do with things that, gender diversity or ethnic diversity or things like that. And so I think, but I think just the term social in today's sort of current climate gets polarized immediately.
You're right.
Without any sort of follow-up inspection. And if I could wave my magic wand with ESG, it would be to change the S to some other, some other generic word that wasn't loaded, because people hear, environmental, social, they forget about the G,
right? And
they're just like, oh, this is, I get a lot of people who say, oh, this is just woke capitalism.
These are polarized tree huggers. This has nothing to do with me.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I can say, all of our clients would not fit into into that stereotype, right? All of them come to us because they see ESG and, again, sustainability at large as a business driver for them. It's not a checkbox item. This is a way for them to differentiate themselves either with their market or with their customers. So
a customer calls you and says, hey, Kai, we need an ESG rating. We need your consultancy. Before we publish it, we want to get it all spruced up and clean. It's like someone coming in and helping polish the P&L.
Yeah.
We need your help to get... Are they usually surprised by what you come back with, or do they usually kind of say, we kind of know where we are? Are they worse than they expected? Are they typically better than they expected? If one of my clients listening right now called you, should they prepare to be disappointed about your feedback or excited by your feedback?
That's a great question. I think more often than not, they're better than they thought.
Yeah.
Companies come back and they're happy. I think where we end up helping companies the most is really understanding what's important. Because a lot of people, it's very easy to sort of go online and try to research this. And what you come out with, we see this a lot, is that companies do a materiality matrix, right? They poll a bunch of different people, investors, employees, other stakeholders, to figure out what's important. That's called a materiality matrix. And they identify the top 32 things that they should work on, right? It's an unmanageable number. There's only 4 or 5 that are actually important and material to that company that really move the needle. And I think where we come in is usually doing that sort of step back. Say, okay, you've done this and it's instantly overwhelming. You've come up with your top 25 list and you got 2 people to work on this. There's no way you're going to do a good job across this. Here's what's actually important. Here's the top 2 things that you can work on, or top 3, and here's a roadmap that's manageable. Here's a 2 or 3 year roadmap that you can follow, and we can consistently get better, develop better reporting, but you can implement this. And I think that that's what we do a good job of with customers, because customers usually call us, they already have something, right? It's not a brand new thing to them. It's an overwhelming thing. It's a new thing. And quite frankly, right now, things are changing so rapidly that it's very easy to get sort of out of sync and, not know what's coming.
Yeah. So they're calling you. You've said this earlier, because of an opportunity. But I imagine if let's say I'm the leader of a $50 million company, and I now realize that I've got to hire a consultant to help me get my ESG score. Yes, there's an opportunity on the other side of it, a government contract, a Coca-Cola contract, as we've used our hypotheticals here today. But I'm the CEO who suddenly, let's say 5 years ago, had to hire a diversity and inclusion specialist. This is not something I knew I needed. Now I need it in order to go through. Now I need an ESG consultant. Is the pushback to this, hey, let me do my business. No one knows my business better than me. And now I got all these meddlesome people coming in from the edges to tell me what I need in order to get this contract. What happened to the good old days of just letting me run my show? Right. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that businesses evolve. All businesses evolve. What I studied in graduate school is dated by today's business standards. Yeah. And so I think that, part of my reaction is like, there's always going to be a transformation in business. You're always going to need to sort of re-up and level up to different things as you mature and grow a business. The other is, there's definitely, a group of CEOs and senior leaders that are like, oh, this is just another expense for us. I've been happy when we've been able to show sort of the ROI for this, right? It's like, no, this is a business for you. Think of it like that, not as a cost center. But I think, the broader thing is that we're now dealing with something that's here to stay. And they're very much going to be winners and losers in the ESG world. There's going to be companies that differentiate themselves by being proactive about this, and there's going to be companies that sort of go kicking and screaming, just like all other things. You're going to have a group of laggards that it's going to be more expensive for them to do business. Right? They're not going to have access to sustainable financing or low cost of financing, or employee retention will be at the low end of their peer group, things like that. So this is there's the old adage, the purpose of a business is to make money for the shareholders. Yes. This is not that. ESG is not that. Yeah. I would argue that it is. Long term. Because as the market changes and others go to ESG way, this is those that are there first will benefit the shareholders. That's right. Your comment earlier was this is generational. Get into that for me. Sure. I mean, I think when you look at the buying habits of Gen Z and millennials, particularly young millennials, there's they have a very different perspective, what the way that they think about the world. They've grown up in a different time. And I think what's really important is they've grown up in a time when access to information was ubiquitous. Right? Yeah. And so researching a company was not hard, is not hard anymore. Right? When I was growing up, if I wanted to know how a company performed on anything, that was go to the library. Like now it's just go on TikTok.
Right.
Right. It's a very, very different information channel. And so it's much easier for people to make decisions about companies, particularly when you're just beginning to form an opinion, right? For perhaps you and I and other listeners, we've formed opinions about a company already, right?
Do you think there'll be a day when I could hypothetically walk down the grocery store aisle with ESG scores on products?
100%.
100%?
100%. That's
How
coming.
far is that day?
That day is, depending on the product, is now. You can download apps to get many of these types of scores on companies. In fact, Motive started as that.
Oh, really?
And we started as that.
Let's get into that a little bit. We're running up on time here.
Sure.
Someone's interested in what you can do. Someone has questions. How do they find Motive?
Sure. So the easiest way is our website, which is just motiveesg.com. Mm-hmm. So MOTIVE ESG.com. Or you can email me, just Kai, Kai, at motiveesg.com. That's the easiest way.
And you can help them formulate their ESG score.
Yes.
You can help them prepare their ESG score for a proposal to a larger company.
Sure. We will help them prepare their what's called a corporate social responsibility report or an impact report. And for private companies, they don't get ESG scores. That's really a public company thing, but it's the same mechanism for private companies going through the same sort of reporting process.
Do you help companies, private or public, with promotion of their score? In other words, now that you've got this, let's make sure you're using it.
Yeah. I mean, we certainly do, we're big advocates for companies to promote this as part of their business, and we do help them.
Yeah. Kai Gray, one of the partners of Motive. It's an ESG consultancy. You can find more about them at motiveesg.com. It sounds like this is a world that's already there, but people like me, not aware of it. Kai, thank you so much. This is fascinating.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. When we come back, we'll be in segment 5. We'll review what we've talked about here, as well as talk about what things we have upcoming. Looking forward to it. Great conversation with Kai. We'll be right back.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Customer service never goes out of style. In fact, I think it's safe to say that customer service is more valuable and more important now more than ever. Hi, this is Cam Marston. One thing that my over 200 episodes of What's Working has taught me is how important customer service is to building and maintaining a thriving business. It's the growing need for customer service that's led me to partner with one of the state's leading customer service trainers to create our program called Delivering 5-Star Customer Service. Your team will get one 90-minute training session per month for 6 consecutive months. Each session builds on the skills learned the previous month, allowing your customer-facing teams to practice before moving on to the next lesson. And the 6 lessons address everything from appearance to electronic communications to conflict resolution to maintaining a service mindset. Our program travels and is delivered in person at your workplace, nothing virtual. You simply can't practice the level of the skills this course teaches virtually. For more information, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's schedule a time to talk. Remember, you have less to fear from outside competition than you do from discourtesy and bad service from inside your own company. Again, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's talk about your business. Well, I knew ESG had a role to play. I remember hearing about it. As I've perhaps said a number of times before, I do a lot of work in the financial services communities, and there was a lot of conversations back in the day as I was waiting in their conferences to begin my presentation or something like that, of the prediction of the value and the importance of ESG to investors. And perhaps we're finally seeing that in the Deep South. It's coming around. The organizations who are focusing on this perhaps have a leg up on it. And I thought it was really interesting that he said 100% with complete certainty that there will be a day that you and I will walk down the grocery store aisle and the company, the manufacturers of whatever product we're looking at on the packaging will be that company's ESG score. And it will be a motivation for us to either buy or not buy, certainly be influenced by the price of the product. But do we buy something with a higher ESG score with a higher price, or do we shop purely by the dollar? That's one of the beautiful parts of capitalism, is that it will figure itself out. My suspicion is that if you're a mid-sized company and you want to do any sort of contracting with the federal government, your ESG score will become more important to them if it's not already, and it is something that you need to be aware of. Yes, it's another item, let's say, quote unquote, attacking your bottom line, another thing you need to do in order to stay in business. I heard this a lot 5-6 years ago, as we said in the interview, as there was a rise of these diverse corporate diversity officers, diversity inclusion officers. In order to stay in business these days, these people were saying, we've got to include this. This is not an area that I had prepared for. It includes another salary. It includes programming that these people recommend. It also makes my people vulnerable to turnover, to reprimands, to things of this nature. But it's a necessary part of the business world today. I wish it were getting easier. It's getting more complex. That is undoubtedly the direction it's going. ESG made me think about acronyms. And we're going to change pace here a little bit. ESG made me think about acronyms and the prevalence of acronyms across so much part of the business world. Those of you who are regular listeners of the show know that from time to time, I play one of the commentaries that I write. Each week, one of my Alabama Public Radio commentaries. I broadcast a commentary on Alabama Public Radio, and from time to time, when there is time, I pull one in. This one, upcoming, is about acronyms. The commentary series is called Keeping It Real. I made a short statement the other day, and my son immediately replied, "That's cap. C-A-P, cap. I'm unsure what it means. It's either that's the gospel truth or that's a bold-faced lie." I thought about it for a moment and I decided I didn't want to know. For centuries, generations have used hairstyles, vocabulary, music, and clothing to separate themselves from adults, just like my kids are doing today. We called things cool or grody or sick. Today, my kids use cap and lit. When I say someone was lit, it means they were very overserved. With kids today, lit means cool or fun or hip or exciting. And there's a part of me that wants to adopt this language to try to stay young. There's a bigger part of me that says, stay away. My daughter and her friends use the word like as an opening quotation mark. For example, she said, like I didn't do it. And I immediately said, like it was you. I saw you. And then she said, like, well, that's cap. And again, I'm clueless. The stay-at-home moms in my part of town have started using the expression, all the things. It means just so much of everything. I got so many chores and errands, and the kids need me, and all the things. All the things. Listen for it. It'll be coming from an SUV driver in yoga tights. Sociologists have studied that shared words, and specifically acronyms, self-identify people as part of an in-crowd. At a financial services conference, I was amazed by the overflow of TLAs and FLAs. Attendees bandied them back and forth to say to each other, I'm an insider, and to remind outsiders like me that I'm an outsider. Financial services love their TLAs. And when they can't find a tidy TLA, they go to FLAs. 3-letter acronyms and 4-letter acronyms, by the way. In a conference call a few weeks ago, I was immediately told through the use of insider language that I was an outsider. It was a passive-aggressive masterpiece. The TLAs and FLAs numbered in the dozens. The guy leading the call was letting me know he's my alpha. And it wasn't like he was a silverback gorilla standing on a rock beating his chest to declare his dominance, but it was very much like a silverback gorilla standing on a rock beating his chest to declare his dominance. The evangelicals have insider language too, and this may offend some, but you'll recognize the use of the word just in your prayers. Father God, just wrap us in your love and just heal our hearts with your manifest of greatness and just feed us with the bounty of your loving kindness as we just work to serve your steadfast love and just keep your son in the front of our eyes. And I stop listening and start counting. I can't help it. And I'm pretty sure if the universe's editor-in-chief were to speak to us, he'd say, "What's with all the justs? The reason I don't answer your prayers is I lose focus and start counting." I'm Cam Marston, and I'm just trying to keep it real and all the things. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a good week, everybody. You're listening to What's Working. We'll be back next week.